Hello and welcome to the first part of a short series of tutorials where we'll be looking at the functionality of Pixar's image tool within Renderman Studio. Now, if you've been following along with some of the earlier tutorials, you will have seen the image tool being used quite extensively, but we're going to delve slightly deeper into its functionality in order to explore its advantages over the inbuilt Maya render view. Those of you who've been following again with previous tutorials, you'll be quite used to me just setting up a simple scene before we start anything, just so we have something to work with. So quite common to put in a plane. In this case I'm going to put in a cylinder. Okay. Cone shape. And a cube. Okay, so we've got some objects here, just something to be working with. Let me just move them around slightly. Again, this is not critical, this is just to have something to render. Okay. Let's have a look. Here we go. Let's just do a quick render straight out of the box. What we'll get here with Renderman renders. Okay, so this is our Renderman settings, render current frame. Out of the box, what we get is a render in the Maya render view with no materials applied, which is what we expect. Okay, let's apply some materials to this. So let's apply Renderman materials, and I will make a matte material for the base, which is white. I'm not going to go through the linear workflow in this particular tutorial. We could do, but I'd advise you to have a look back at the previous tutorial where we looked at that. And I'm going to be staying in Maya for most of the texturing that we're doing here as well, just to keep things as simple as possible, concentrating on the actual image tool. Okay, so let's apply another material to this, and we'll make it a reddish color. Again, it's not going to render particularly well because we don't have gamma correction. Let's give this general purpose material, which will have some specularity to it, and let's make it blue. These are all quite loud colors. And let's make this glass, which I know is going to look a little bit strange because it doesn't have a subdivision scheme on it yet. Let's just do another quick render of this. So let's render. Okay, this is what we're getting. Not surprising, not looking great. First thing that I want to do, because I have glass in the scene, is I want to actually make sure that I have ray tracing set up. So let's put ray tracing on, and let's have ray depth for specular to 5 and for diffuse to 5. Should be okay. Let's see what we get now. Let's re-render. Starting to get something that looks a bit more like glass. Okay, and possibly some reflections there. I'm going to put in a an environment light and re-render, and we should get something that looks reasonable. Not expecting fantastic results, but something reasonable. Okay, for this I've just put a standard environment light, and my samples in this look like they're a little bit low, so let me just check where my samples are. Shadows, trace shadows, no behavior. Samples are at 16. Let's change my samples here up to 3264. Let's say 64, and I'll get less noise. And re-render. Okay, we're getting something slightly nicer now. Shading rate again. Let's go back to the Renderman settings. Quality, shading rate. Remember, the lower the shading rate, the better your shading will look. So 1 is generally acceptable, but will have a hit in terms of render time. So let's re-render that. Okay. Looking significantly better. This last material is just annoying me, so I'm going to actually apply a different material to it at the moment, just to make our lives easier. It's not necessarily something which is going to be a dramatic difference to us, but let's just make it a red matte material and see what we look like. Okay, this will do for our example. I could fiddle with the glass, and there's some very good tutorials which I've done. Well, I think they're pretty good tutorials which I've done on glass which will help. This is a very simple, basic scene setup. Okay? Now, rendering in the render view, which is perfectly acceptable, but there are advantages to using the Renderman image tool, which is supplied with Renderman Studio. Okay, let's have a look at how we actually tell Renderman Studio to use it. So the way in which I would do it is go to the Renderman menu up here, okay, go to Render and click on the radio button, and it's opened in my other window here, so let's just bring it over here. Preview style is here. The default is render view, which is this window here. What I want to do is I want to send it to it, which is the image tool. Okay, now we have some extra options here which we can look at. First thing I'm going to change here is my threads. I'll probably get slightly faster if I change my threads to 8 threads. What was my render time there? That was 9 seconds. Now I've got to go into image tool. If I just click render now, it will launch the image tool, which is an external viewer. And we'll see, here we go. That's rendered in the image tool. So this is it. Let me turn this render view off. It. Icon down here on my toolbar represents it. The first thing which I want to do that I find useful with it is to right click and set it to always on top. This means when I go to render, let's just do another render here, it's always on top. So it is on top of my windows. I just find it much more useful to keep it raised. I can minimize it, but I prefer to keep it around, possibly on my dual screen. Okay, so right click and always on top is one of the first things which I tend to use with the image tool. Now, if we go to the very top of the image tool bar with a right click, try re-render, it actually launches a render again of our camera. So if I move around slightly in Maya and try re-render, you'll see we're getting the different views. I don't have to launch it from Maya, I can launch it from the image tool itself, which again is very, very useful at times. Let me just close this down. One thing which we may want to do here is we may want to actually set our bit depth to be higher than 8 bits. So in this case, let me just say I go to 16 or 32, and it may have an influence on some of your work. Let's just try a re-render, see if we get a different view. Seems to be pretty much similar. Okay. Most of the tools within it are accessed through a right click for the primary tools. So right click and the first thing we get is re-render, which is the most commonly used. The next thing which we have is reset pan zoom. Okay, which you can just see very slightly has happened there. Let's go right click, view, and fit image, which resizes the window to fit the image. It's pretty self-explanatory. View, zoom in, which there is a shortcut key which is Z. Okay, so that's zoomed in. If I go Z, oops, and Shift Z, Z, and Shift Z. So the shortcut keys I'm hitting here, Z to zoom in, Shift Z to zoom out. Okay, Z to zoom in. Z to zoom in, Z for the Americans. Sorry, apologies for my Anglo-Irish background. Z. So again, if we want to actually fit the image, Control and F will fit the image. It's actually zoomed out there. Let me just go and view, reset pan and zoom, right click, view, and fit image. So it zooms the extent of the image. Okay. The view commands are pretty straightforward. There are other ways of accessing them as well. So the zoom in, zoom out, but we can also use similar keys to Maya. So for instance, holding down Alt and left mouse button will let us pan. Okay, and we could also scroll. Using the scroll, if you could scroll on your mouse, if you're using a mouse which has a scroll wheel, you can scroll in and out. Okay, so that's left mouse button. We don't actually have to hold Alt, it's my Maya habits coming out there. So left mouse button will actually pan, and scroll will scroll in and out. Okay, let's see how we're going now. I'm going to hold it here for a moment because we've just about hit 10 minutes, and I'll come back very shortly with the second half of this. So what we've looked at here, first of all, let's just recap what we've done so far. We've shown how to launch it, the image tool, by setting up through Renderman View, preview render options here. It's launched it. We've got the bit depth, should be set to 32 is my preference. Okay, we've looked at right click, gets us access to the main menus, Rerender being the most common, and the second most common being the view commands. We've gone from reset pan and zoom to fit image to zoom in, which again is the Z key or Z key, and Alt Z, sorry, yes, Shift Z zooms out. Okay. Left mouse button pans, middle mouse wheel scrolls. So I'm going to call a halt to it here just for the moment, and we'll come back and start exploring some more of the functionality. Thanks for your time and your patience. Some of these may seem self-explanatory, and they are to an extent, but we'll come back and start looking at some of the more features that we have within it.